Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard. Today I turn the camera over to you, the Hollywood Graveyard community, as we travel the world to visit famous and historical graves in your neck of the woods. Today we make our way across the American West to find legends like Sherman Hemsley, Ernest Hemingway, Rebecca Schaeffer, Tex Ritter, and many more. My friends, the time is yours. After a brief detour through the Black Lagoon, we're back to the home stretch of round 3 of our viewers special. Just 2 videos left in this series. Today we'll cover all the states west of where we left off last time, except California, which will be its own video, and the last in this series. That will land us back home in LA, where we'll pick up our regular Hollywood series and other unique special editions we have planned for 2025. Let's kick off our time today in Texas. Though named the Lone Star State, there are quite a few stars laid to rest here, as we've seen in previous videos. We'll begin in the Houston area at Brookside Memorial Park. Here we find the grave of Jason David Frank. The actor and mixed martial artist is remembered by you fans of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers as Tommy Oliver, the Green Ranger, and the White Ranger in the various TV series and movies in the 1990s and 2000s. Later he'd also play the Red Turbo Ranger and Red Zeo Ranger. Outside of acting, Jason competed in various martial arts disciplines, including MMA. Sadly, Jason struggled with depression and mental health issues, taking his own life in 2022 at age 49. Next up is Forest Park, the Woodlands Cemetery. This is where Dusty Hill is laid to rest. You fans of ZZ Top will recognize Dusty as the bearded, hatted bass player for the legendary rock band. ZZ Top formed in the Houston area in 1969, with Dusty Hill being a founding member, performing with the band for a half-century. On hits like Give Me All Your Lovin', Give Me All Your Lovin', All Your Hugs and Kisses Good, Sharp Dressed Man, Crazy about it, shy as me, and LaGrange. Well, here it's fine. Hill would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with ZZ Top in 2004. He passed away in 2021 at the age of 72. Forest Lawn Memorial Park is in Beaumont. Here lies Babe Didrikson Zaharias, considered one of the greatest female athletes of the 20th century. She excelled in golf, baseball, basketball, and track and field. Babe won 2 gold medals and a silver in track and field at the 1932 Summer Olympics, setting 2 world records in the process. Her post-Olympic career consisted mainly of an exceptional career as a golfer. As a professional golfer, she would win 10 LPGA major championships. During this time, she'd become America's first female golf celebrity. Babe would be inducted into numerous halls of fame, and in 2021 was awarded a posthumous Presidential Medal of Freedom. Babe was just 45 when she died from cancer in 1956. This is Oak Bluff Memorial Park in Port Neches. We're here to find America's most beloved cowboy, Tex Ritter. The country music singer and actor was a major Western star in the 30s and 40s. He began performing on radio and Broadway in the 20s, singing and telling tales of the Old West. He made his way to the movies in the 30s, starring in westerns and musicals like Song of the Gringo and Sing Cowboy Sing. He was a major recording artist as well, with hits like I'm Wasting My Tears on You and The Ballad of High Noon. Do not forsake me, oh my darling. Tex died from a heart attack at age 68. He was patriarch of an entertainment family, including son John Ritter. Our next Texas stop is Roselawn in Denton. Here lies Byron Nelson. He's another of the 20th century's great golfers, ranking in fact among the greatest of all time. He was active in the 30s and 40s, remembered for his incredible 11 consecutive tournament wins and 18 total championships throughout his career. He is the namesake of the Byron Nelson Classic and was inducted into the World Golf Hall of Fame. Shortly after his death in 2006 at age 94, Byron was also awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. Also here is Al Dexter. The country music artist of the 30s and 40s is best remembered for his hit inscribed right here on his marker. In 1943, he released Pistol Packin' Mama, which became one of the most popular hits of the World War II era.
Lay that pistol down, pistol packin' mama, lay that pistol down.
It became the marching chorus of the New York Yankees and would even inspire a film of the same name. The song would go on to be covered by the likes of Bing Crosby and the Andrews Sisters. Dexter lived to be 78. This rustic cemetery is Scott Cemetery in McKinney. Here we find the grave of Haystacks Calhoun. He was a professional wrestler who earned the moniker Haystacks by demonstrating his strength tossing bales of hay. His exaggerated hillbilly wrestling persona was magnified by his 6'4" and more than 600-pound frame, in overalls and this distinctive horseshoe chain around his neck. Haystacks made his debut in the 50s and wrestled through the 70s, winning a number of championships in this era, particularly in tag team. Haystacks' increasing weight and declining health forced him into retirement. He would lose his leg to diabetes and passed away in 1989 at age 55. In 2017, he was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Nearby is Pecan Grove Cemetery. This sword in the stone inspired grave belongs to John Gary. He was a popular singer in the 60s and 70s and was considered one of the most talented singers of his era due to his extraordinary breath control and tonal quality of his voice. Gary would appear on many TV variety shows of the era and even host his own variety show. He also provided the voice of John Alden in the Rankin Bass special The Mouse and the Mayflower. John Gary died from cancer at age 65. His grave remained unmarked until 2012, when a monument inspired by the sword in the stone was dedicated here in his memory. In Webster, we reach Forest Park East Cemetery. Here we find a monument to Shawn Phelan. He was a child actor in the 80s and 90s, perhaps best remembered for his role as Derek in the 1991 film Toy Soldiers. He also appeared in episodes of shows like The Wonder Years and Murder, She Wrote. Tragically, Shawn died from injuries sustained in a car accident at just 23. The injuries had left him comatose for 4 years. He was cremated, his ashes scattered. This cenotaph was later placed here in his memory. This is Horton City Cemetery, eternal home to a noted writer named Horton Foote. He won 2 Academy Awards for screenwriting for the films To Kill a Mockingbird and Tender Mercies. He was also nominated for The Trip to Bountiful. And at the dawn of television in the 50s, Horton was a notable writer of teleplays for shows like Kraft Theater and Philco Television Playhouse. In 1995, Horton Foote was also awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Drama for his play The Young Man from Atlanta. He lived to be 92. Let's take in a little scenery here at Memorial Oaks Cemetery in Houston as we make our way to the grave of Chairman of the Boards, Moses Malone. He was a professional basketball player in the 70s to the 90s, playing for a number of teams including the Houston Rockets and Philadelphia 76ers. With the 76ers, he'd be an NBA champion in 1983. Malone would be named MVP 3 times in his career, was a 12-time NBA All-Star, and in 2001 was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Today, Malone ranks among the greatest players in the history of the sport. He died at age 60 from heart disease. Also here we find Gino Hernandez, a name perhaps familiar to you fans of wrestling. Gino is remembered for his appearances in the WCCW in the 70s and 80s. During that time, he'd become one of the most notable wrestlers in the WCCW and formed the tag team The Dynamic Duo with Chris Adams. Among his accomplishments are being a 4-time WCWA World Heavyweight Champion, a 6-time NWA Texas Heavyweight Champion, and 5-time WCWA World Tag Team Champion. In 1986, after not being heard from for days, Gino's body was discovered in his home. Initially investigated as a homicide, his death was eventually ruled a cocaine overdose, though to this day, there remains skepticism about his true cause of death. Gino was just 28. Forest Park Westheimer Cemetery is also in Houston. Here we find the grave of Dino Connor. As noted here on his stone, he was a member of the R&B group H-Town. The group was formed in 1990 by Dino along with his brother and friend. They recorded a number of hits in the mid-90s, including Knockin' to Boots and A Thin Line Between Love and Hate.
Good loving body, rockin', knockin' boots all night long.
Tragically, Dino and his wife died when a speeding SUV crashed into their car. He was 28. Did you see the 1981 TV movie Murder in Texas, starring Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross? The story that inspired that film concerns Joan Hill, who was portrayed by Farrah Fawcett in the film. Joan was a Houston area socialite and equestrian whose unexplained death at age 38 led her husband, John Hill, to be the first person indicted by the state of Texas on a charge of murder by omission. John would subsequently be murdered himself, and his killer then killed by police in a shootout. The events were chronicled in the book Blood and Money, the inspiration for the aforementioned movie. Let's find another one for you wrestling fans here at Mount Olivet Catholic Cemetery. This is the grave of Earthquake John Tenta. He began his career training as a sumo wrestler in Japan before switching to professional wrestling and becoming a high-profile star in the WWE in the 80s and 90s. He feuded with the likes of Hulk Hogan and would win the WWF Tag Team Championship with Typhoon. Earthquake retired from wrestling in 2004 after a cancer diagnosis. The disease claimed his life at just 42. Let's visit Houston's National Cemetery next, where veterans and their families are laid to rest. Here lies Teala Loring, real name Marcia Pickler. She appeared in 32 films between 1942 and 1950. Early in her career, she had small roles in classics like Holiday Inn and Double Indemnity, and would have more prominent roles in films like Delinquent Daughters, Black Market Babies, and Return of the Ape Man. Teala retired from acting after making The Arizona Cowboy in 1950. She lived to be 84, passing away from injuries sustained in an automobile accident. She was the older sister of actresses Deborah Paget and Lisa Gaye, our next stop here. This is the niche of Lisa Gaye, Teala's sister. The sisters were born into an entertainment family, their mother being a vaudeville and burlesque performer. Lisa's film roles include as Anna in 10,000 Bedrooms and Jenny in Drums Across the River, but she's perhaps best known for her numerous television appearances in the 50s through the 60s. She played Colette on The Bob Cummings Show, Gwen on How to Marry a Millionaire, and made guest appearances on just about every major show of this era, from Get Smart to I Dream of Jeannie and Mod Squad. Lisa lived to be 81. Back out to the grounds, we find Willard Brown. He was a professional baseball player. Willard began his career in the Negro League for the Kansas City Monarchs, where he'd lead the league in hits for 8 seasons, a record tied with Ty Cobb for most in baseball history. Willard would become one of the first African Americans to play in the MLB in 1947 for the St. Louis Browns, where he'd continue his dominance as a hitter. On July 20th, 1947, he became the first African American player to hit a home run in the American League. Willard Brown was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2006 and lived to be 81. Here too is another legend of baseball and African-American pioneer, Dan Bankhead. He also began his career in the Negro League, playing for a number of teams. He was called one of the top 3 pitchers, in the Negro League. On August 26, 1947, he made his debut in Major League Baseball with the Brooklyn Dodgers, becoming the first African-American pitcher in the major leagues. Dan was just 55 when he died from cancer. Our last stop in the National Cemetery brings us to the grave of Brooks Benedict. Brooks never became a household name, but he was prolific in his output as an actor, with well over 300 credits to his name, from the silent era into the 50s. He made his first film appearance in 1923 and would go on to appear alongside greats like Harold Lloyd in films including The Freshman and Speedy. His career didn't slow down into the talkies, though his roles later in his career were mostly smaller supporting roles in films like The Devil and Miss Jones. Brooks died from heart disease at age 71. Next up is Houston Memorial Gardens. Heading into the mausoleum, we find the crypt of Johnny Nash. The singer and songwriter is best remembered today for his chart-topping 1972 hit, I Can See Clearly Now.
I can see clearly now, the rain
In the 1960s, Nash sang the theme song for the animated series The Mighty Hercules. Nash's music can be heard in numerous film and television soundtracks as well, including Thelma and Louise. He lived to be 80. Oak Grove Memorial Gardens is in Irving. Here lies Chris Adams, known in the wrestling world as Gentleman Chris. He rose to prominence in the wrestling world in the 1980s, performing in the WCCW, where he'd become known for his signature superkick, and eventually rise to World Heavyweight Champion. He also tag-teamed with Gino Hernandez as the dynamic duo. Later, Chris was also known for training Stone Cold Steve Austin. Chris was 46 when he died after being shot in the chest by a friend during a drunken brawl. This is Mission Burial Park in San Antonio, Texas. Here we find the grave of Rube Waddell. He was a Major League Baseball player from the early days of the sport, making his debut in 1897 with the Louisville Colonels. He'd play for 13 years on several teams, including the Philadelphia Athletics. Today he's remembered as one of the greatest pitchers of all time, with an electric fastball and devastating curveball. In 1904, he struck out 349 batters, a record that would stand until the 1960s. Rube Waddell was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1946. He was just 37 when he died after suffering from tuberculosis. Let's find another Hall of Fame baseball player who also rests here at Mission Burial Park. Meet Ross Youngs. He played 10 seasons for the New York Giants in the teens and 20s. Youngs was part of the team that won 4 consecutive National League pennants and 2 World Series in 1921 and 22. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1972, but his life and career had long been cut short by then, having passed away at just 30 from Bright's disease. Next up in Texas is Waxahachie City Cemetery. In these grounds rests Frederic Forrest. The actor rose to prominence with his performance as Tom in the 1972 film When the Legends Die. It earned him a Golden Globe nomination. He'd go on to earn another Golden Globe nomination and Academy Award nomination for his role in 1979's The Rose. Forrest is also remembered for collaborations with Francis Ford Coppola in films like Apocalypse Now, and for appearances on TV shows like 21 Jump Street and Lonesome Dove. He lived to be 86. Let's satisfy our sweet tooths here at Greenwood Memorial Park in Fort Worth, and the grave of H.T. Pangburn, the inscription on the stone a replica of the logo of the Pangburn Candy Company. It was formed in 1914 by H.T. Pangburn to manufacture ice cream and later candy. Their best-known product is a candy called Pangburn's Millionaires, still enjoyed by candy lovers to this day. Pangburn lived to be 52. Also here is a man who brought musical pride to Texas, William J. Marsh. He was a musician and composer notable for composing Texas Our Texas, the official state song. It was written in 1924 and would be officially selected as the state song in 1929. Marsh lived to be 90. West Hill Cemetery is in Sherman, Texas. Here is the grave of Olive Oatman, a folk figure from the Old West. While traveling west, her family was attacked by Native Americans. Her parents and most of her siblings were killed, while 14-year-old Olive and her younger sister Marianne were taken as slaves. A year later, the sisters were traded to the Mojave people. Mary Ann died from starvation, and Olive spent 4 years with the Mojave people, into which she was adopted. 5 years after the attack, she was repatriated into American society. Curiously, she emerged from her captivity with a distinctive blue tattoo on her chin. She's believed to be the first white woman to receive a traditional Native American tattoo. Olive spoke fondly of the Mojaves who had adopted her. Her story and the oddity of her tattoo gained national attention and made her something of a celebrity. Her story dramatized in books, plays, movies, and more. Olive died after a heart attack at age 65. Let's head now into the mausoleum at Forest Park Lawndale Cemetery in Houston. Here is the crypt of Red Adair. He was a famed oil well firefighter and blowout specialist. His exploits in extinguishing massive well fires all over the world became the stuff of legend and would inspire stories on the silver screen, perhaps most notably, he inspired John Wayne's character in the 1968 film Hellfighters. Red lived to be 89. These impressive gates welcome us to Bear Creek Cemetery in Euless. You fans of the 80s hair metal band Warrant will recognize the name Jani Lane. He was frontman, lead singer, and songwriter for the band, which formed in the 1980s. Their hits include Heaven and Cherry Pie.
She's my cherry pie, cool drink of water, such a sweet surprise.
In 1989, they even contributed a track, Game of War, to the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure film soundtrack. Lane left Warrant in 2004, then again in 2008 after a brief reunion. He was just 47 when he died from alcohol poisoning. We've arrived now at Tyler Memorial Park. This is the grave of a notorious cult leader named David Koresh. He was head of a religious sect, Branch Davidians, claiming to be their final prophet. The group was based out of Waco, Texas, in a building they called Mount Carmel. In February 1993, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI tried to execute a warrant on Mount Carmel on the suspicion of illegal weapons and child abuse. The Davidians resisted, and a standoff ensued. Negotiations continued for a peaceful surrender, but unable to break the standoff for weeks, the FBI eventually raided the compound, and violence ensued. Mount Carmel burned to the ground, and Koresh and 74 cult followers lost their lives. Koresh was 33. The events have been documented and dramatized on screen, including the miniseries Waco and numerous documentaries. St. Mary's Cemetery is in San Antonio, Texas. In these quiet grounds rests an ultra-centenarian named Juan Vargas. His claim to fame was his longevity. Juan was patriarch of the Vargas family of San Antonio and lived an astonishing 115 years. According to his stone here, he fought in 1810 for Mexican independence and was present at the Battle of the Alamo. Our last Texas stop brings us to the National Cemetery in El Paso, Fort Bliss National Cemetery. Here lies a legend of television comedy, Sherman Hemsley. He's fondly remembered as the small screen's George Jefferson. The character first appeared in a supporting role on All in the Family in the 1970s. The characters of George and Louise Jefferson would then be spun off into their own sitcom, moving on up to the East Side in the tremendously popular sitcom The Jeffersons, featuring a black leading cast. The show debuted in 1975 and ran for 11 seasons, a whopping 253 episodes, making it one of the longest-running sitcoms in television history. The role would earn him an Emmy nomination. Sherman also played Deacon Ernest Fry on Amen and voiced B.P. Richfield on Dinosaurs. There were also film appearances like Bert Wilson in Mr. Nanny. Sherman Hemsley lived to be 74. Adios, Texas. Howdy, Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the graves. First up here is Fairlawn Cemetery in Oklahoma City. Meet a man who made shopping a little easier, Sylvan Goldman. He was an inventor whose greatest contribution to humanity was the shopping cart, which he introduced in 1937 in the Humpty Dumpty supermarket in Oklahoma City. His shopping carts didn't immediately catch on, but as you know, have since become ubiquitous. Other inventions by Goldman also helped advance modern grocery. He lived to be 86. Let's move on to Miami. No, not in Florida, still in Oklahoma. This is Grand Army of the Republic Cemetery and the grave of Richard Kelton. He made his big screen debut in a small role in Truman Capote's In Cold Blood in 1967. He'd go on to make appearances on television shows like Mission Impossible, Gunsmoke, and Charlie's Angels. He also played Ficus on Quark. In 1978, Richard was filming for the miniseries Centennial. A faulty heater in his trailer where he was rehearsing lines leaked carbon monoxide, which suffocated him. Richard Kelton was 35. Continuing north, we reach Kansas. Speaking of In Cold Blood, there's a story of true crime in the grounds of View Valley Cemetery in Garden City. a story made famous by that Truman Capote book, In Cold Blood, which was made into a movie in 1967. The story concerns the Clutter family of Kansas and their murder in 1959. 4 members of the Clutter family, Herb, his wife Bonnie, and their teenage children Nancy and Kenyon, were murdered in their rural home by 2 ex-convicts. The murderers were tried, convicted, and executed for their crimes in 1965. There's also a president here in Kansas, Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the 34th President of the United States, serving from 1953 to 1961. During the war, Eisenhower was the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe and achieved rank of 5-star General of the Army. During his presidency, he obtained a truce in Korea and worked incessantly to ease tensions of the Cold War. Ike also ordered the complete desegregation of the armed forces, saying, "There must be no second-class citizens in this country." Eisenhower died from congestive heart failure at age 78. He rests here alongside his wife, First Lady Mamie Eisenhower. Next up is Nebraska. Wyuka Cemetery is in Lincoln, Nebraska. Here lies Bobby Williams. He was a defensive back in the NFL, playing for the St. Louis Cardinals between 1966 and 1967, and the Detroit Lions between 69 and 71. He was a return specialist as well as playing running back and defensive end in his career. He set Nebraska state records in the 100-yard dash and long jump. Bobby lived to be 70. Also here in Wyuka is another one for those of you with an interest in true crime, the grave of Charles Starkweather. In 1957 and 58, 19-year-old Starkweather went on a killing spree with his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, one of the most notorious crime sprees of the era. They killed 11 over this period. Both Starkweather and Fugate were convicted of their crimes. Starkweather was sentenced to death, executed in the electric chair at the age of 20. His young accomplice, who was underage, served nearly 18 years of her life sentence before being paroled in 1976. These events would be dramatized in film, music, literature, and television. Peter Jackson's film, The Frighteners, for example, was heavily influenced by Starkweather and Fugate. Nearby is Lincoln Memorial Park, where we find the grave of Bob Devaney. He was a football coach heading the Nebraska Cornhuskers between 1962 and 1972. His Cornhuskers would win consecutive national championships in 1970 and 71, and 3 consecutive Orange Bowls. He'd be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1981. Devaney passed away from a heart attack at age 82. In Omaha is another forest lawn. Here we find another one for you football fans, Gale Sayers. He played 7 seasons in the NFL for the Chicago Bears between 1965 and 1971. Sayers was known for his elusiveness and agility, a most difficult player to tackle. His friendship with Bears teammate Brian Piccolo inspired Sayers to write his autobiography, I Am Third, which was the basis for the TV movie Brian's Song. In it, he was portrayed by Billy D. Williams. Gale Sayers suffered from dementia later in life, passing away at age 77. Here too is the unmarked grave of an actress you all know and love if you're fans of 80s movies, Anne Ramsey. In 1985, she perfectly played the villainous Ma Fratelli in the beloved classic Goonies.
The only thing we serve is tongue. You boys like tongue?
You also saw her as the title character in Throw Mama from the Train, a role which earned her an Oscar nomination. Anne also made appearances on television shows like Night Court and Alf. She died from cancer at age 59 in 1988. Her grave here remains unmarked. In the Garden Mausoleum here at Forest Lawn is the crypt of Bob Boozer. He was a professional basketball player for 11 seasons in the NBA, playing forward for a number of teams, including the Caterpillars, Royals, Knicks, Lakers, Bulls, Supersonics, and Bucks. He was part of the Bucks team that won the NBA championship in 1971. Boozer also won gold as part of the 1960 Summer Olympics team. He lived to be 75, passing away from a brain aneurysm. Back out to the grounds, we find the grave of a pioneer of the TV dinner, Gilbert Swanson. He was the son of the founder and namesake of the Swanson Company, Carl Swanson, entombed in the adjacent mausoleum. In the early 50s, Gilbert and his brother Walter and his company brought into the American home the pre-packaged, pre-cooked frozen meal, the TV dinner, a term coined by Swansons. Among their early hits were the chicken pot pie and the turkey dinner. Gilbert passed away from cancer in 1968. His brother is laid to rest nearby in this same cemetery. The company would eventually be bought out by Campbell's, but retained the Swanson name. This is Dowd Memorial Chapel of the Immaculate Conception in Boys Town. Here in the chapel we find the tomb of Father Edward Flanagan. If you've seen the movie Boys Town, starring Spencer Tracy and Mickey Rooney, you might be familiar with the story of Father Flanagan. He was an Irish-born Catholic priest who served in Nebraska. Here he founded an orphanage and educational complex known as Boys Town, a center for troubled youth. Spencer Tracy won one of his 2 Oscars for his portrayal of Father Flanagan in Boys Town. He dedicated the win to Flanagan and donated the statue to Boys Town, which is still in operation to this day. In North Platte Cemetery, nearly hidden behind the main Cook marker, we find Annie Cook, a notorious figure from the Little Chicago era of North Platte during Prohibition. Gambling, illegal booze, prostitution, and extortion all went unchecked here, and a little old lady benefited from them all in a relentless quest for money and power. Annie Cook acquired a brothel under the pretense of a boarding house, into which she even put her teenage daughter to work. And on the farm, her workers endured brutal treatment, starvation, torture, and those who displeased her sometimes ended up dead. She became feared throughout the town, and bribes and extortion of local leaders left her mostly immune from investigation. In fact, in 1934, she killed her own daughter in a rage, throwing an iron pan at her head. But local authorities refused an investigation, stating the death was an accident. Annie's story was chronicled in the book Evil Obsession. If you know your geography, you probably guessed that South Dakota is next. This is St. Michael Catholic Cemetery in Sioux Falls. Here lies Vince Lloyd. He was a sportscaster, broadcasting Chicago Cubs games for some 38 years, between 1949 and 1987. He was also the first radio voice of the Chicago Bulls and would announce events for the Bears, Big Ten, and more. Lloyd died from cancer at age 86. Mountain View Cemetery is in Keystone. Here we find Bobby Buntrock. He was a child actor in the 60s. You fans of the sitcom Hazel will remember Bobby as Harold Baxter in some 154 episodes of the series. You also saw Bobby in episodes of The Virginian, Mr. Ed, and more. He retired from acting in 1967 and tragically died young at the age of 21 when his car veered off a bridge into Battle Creek. Last up here in South Dakota is Lakeview Cemetery in Columbia. This is the grave of Kermit Wall. He was a professional baseball player and infielder playing for the Reds, Athletics, and Browns in the 40s and 50s. After retiring from play, he became a teacher, umpire, and coach here in South Dakota and would eventually be inducted into the South Dakota Sports Hall of Fame. He died from cancer at age 64. Sorry, North Dakota, we didn't get any submissions from you this time, so on to Montana. In Hamilton, we find Riverview Cemetery and the grave of Hoyt Axton. As a musician, he established himself in the 60s as a folk singer with hit songs like Joy to the World, alluded to here on his grave.
Jeremiah was a bullfrog, singing joy to the world now.
The song would later be covered by Three Dog Night and many others. Other popular songs he wrote include The Pusher. Hoyt would also have a career as an actor, playing Randall in Gremlins and Mr. Ramsey in Black Stallion. Axton died at the age of 61 after a series of heart attacks. Buried on top of rim rocks overlooking Billings, Montana is Luther Sage Yellowstone Kelly. He was an adventurer, scout, and soldier in the 19th century frontier. In his day, he was known as one of the greatest hunters, trappers, and Indian scouts in the Old West, particularly in the Yellowstone area of Montana, which earned him his nickname. He also guided expeditions to Alaska. It was his last request to be buried here atop this mountain overlooking the land he scouted and loved. The 1959 movie Yellowstone Kelly, starring Clint Walker, is based on his life. Heading into Billings, we reach Mountain View Cemetery. Here lies Ethel Hayes. She was a well-known cartoonist whose syndicated comic strips in the 20s and 30s reflected flapper culture. Her strips included Vic and Ethel and Flapper Fanny Says. Later she transitioned into illustrating children's books, including Raggedy Ann and Andy. Ethel lived to be 97. Also here we find the grave of Ruth Rogers. She was an actress in the 30s and 40s, appearing in some 34 films of this era. These include The Light of Western Stars, Silver on the Sage, A Night at Earl Carroll's, and The Night Riders alongside John Wayne. Ruth was just 35 when she died from an illness. Next up at Mountain View is the grave of Stan Lind, another cartoonist here in Montana. He created the comic strip Ricochet, a popular Western comic which debuted in 1958 and ran until 1981. It was syndicated in around 100 newspapers. He produced other minor comic strips and published some Western novels as well. Stan died from cancer at age 81. Our last Montana stop is Yellowstone Valley Memorial Park. Here lies David McNally. He was a professional baseball player, a left-handed pitcher in the league from 1962 to 1975, most notably with the Baltimore Orioles, part of the team that won 4 American League pennants and 2 World Series championships. McNally was a 3-time All-Star and would be inducted into the Baltimore Orioles Hall of Fame. He died from cancer at age 60. Turning south, we reach Colorado once again. This scenic cemetery, nestled in the Rocky Mountains outside of Denver, is Idaho Springs Cemetery. Here we find a monument to an individual connected to the Titanic disaster. Shadrach Gale was born in England and later settled in Idaho Springs to work as a tin miner. In 1911, he traveled back to England to visit family. His return voyage back to the US was booked on the ill-fated Titanic. He died in the disaster, his body lost at sea. This monument was later erected here in his memory by the Woodmen of the World. You'll also find some history from the Old West in these mountains. This is Glenwood Springs. Follow the trail to Pioneer Cemetery to find the grave of Doc Holliday. John Holliday earned the nickname Doc because he was trained as a dentist, earning his Doctor of Dental Surgery degree in 1872. He moved west where he became a professional gambler. Here he would meet and befriend Wyatt Earp. They would ride together and fight side by side in that infamous standoff in Tombstone, Arizona, the gunfight at OK Corral in 1881. Holliday spent the following years in Colorado but died at just 36 from tuberculosis. He would be portrayed on film and television numerous times in the decades to follow, including by Victor Mature, Kirk Douglas, Martin Landau, Jason Robards, Dennis Quaid, and Val Kilmer. Not far from Doc is another figure from the Old West, on the other side of the law, Kid Curry. He was an outlaw who rode with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid's Wild Bunch gang. He's sometimes called the wildest of the Wild Bunch, having killed numerous law enforcement officers in shootouts. He participated in bank and train robberies, but the law would soon catch up to him. He was tracked down by a posse and wounded in a gunfight. To avoid capture, he fatally shot himself at age 37. We're in Denver now, and Fairmount Cemetery. This impressive monument is to a man named Francis Lowry. He was Colorado's only aerial observer killed in World War I and namesake for Lowry Air Force Base. Lieutenant Lowry completed 22 missions over German battle lines before being shot down. He was posthumously promoted to first lieutenant and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. He was originally buried in France, but was moved to Denver in 1921. Evergreen Cemetery is in Colorado Springs. Steffi Westerfeld was a figure skater who earned a place on the United States World Team for the 1961 World Figure Skating Championship. Tragically, she would perish with the entire American figure skating team when the plane they were in crashed in Belgium on the way to the World Championship in Prague on February 15, 1961. Steffi was just 17. Here too we find the grave of Forrest Gregg. He was a professional football player, a tackle, playing most of his career for the Green Bay Packers. Throughout his career he'd be a part of 3 Super Bowl championship teams. After playing, Gregg would head coach a number of teams, the Cleveland Browns, Cincinnati Bengals, and Green Bay Packers. As engraved here on his stone, Gregg would be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1977. Our journey now takes us to the mausoleum in Fairmount Cemetery back in Denver. This is the niche of Bob Howsam, a name perhaps familiar to you fans of sports here in Colorado. He played a key role in establishing 2 leagues, the American Football League and baseball's Continental League. He'd serve as general manager of the Cincinnati Reds, during which time the team won 4 National League pennants and 2 World Series. In 1959, Bob co-founded the Denver Broncos football team, and in 1993 was instrumental in helping bring the Colorado Rockies to Denver. Bob lived to be 89. Also here in the mausoleum is the crypt of Jack Weil. Roaming the American West, you may find yourself donned in one of Jack Weil's Western shirts. Jack was founder of the Western clothing manufacturer Rockmount Ranchwear, notable for their snap Western shirts with sawtooth pockets. His fashions have been worn by Western musicians and actors and featured prominently in films like Brokeback Mountain and Urban Cowboy. Jack continued to lead his company well past the age of 100, living to 107. Fort Collins is our next stop, and Grandview Cemetery. Here we find the grave of Michelle Carey. The actress is best remembered today for her role as Josephine in the 1966 film El Dorado. Other films include Live a Little, Love a Little with Elvis Presley. And she made appearances on television as well, including on Starsky and Hutch, Love American Style, The Wild Wild West, and more. Michelle lived to be 76. We're back at Mount Olivet Cemetery, where in a previous video we found astronaut Jack Swigert. Also here is an athlete named Freddie Steinmark. Freddie was a member of the 1969 Texas Longhorns football team, which won a national championship. It was dubbed Game of the Century. 2 days later, Freddie was diagnosed with cancer and had to have his leg amputated. On New Year's Day, Freddie stood proud on the sideline as his team defeated Notre Dame in the 1970 Cotton Bowl. His fight against cancer came to national attention and inspired the National Cancer Act of 1971, thus beginning the war on cancer. Freddie died in 1971 at just 22. His story inspired the 2015 film My All-American. Nearby, we find a musician named Jerry Corbetta. He was a singer and songwriter for the rock band Sugarloaf. The band had a hit with their 1970 track, Green-Eyed Lady. Jerry continued with Sugarloaf until 1978, then joined Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. He passed away from Pick's disease at age 68. Next up, New Mexico. Only you can prevent forest fires. If that statement conjured up images of a bear in a campaign hat, then you might guess who we're here in Capitan to visit. This is the grave of the first living Smokey Bear. In 1950, when Smokey was a cub, wildfire burned his forest home and injured the cub. He was rescued and would become the first living symbol of wildfire prevention and wildlife conservation. Smokey would live at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. for the next 26 years, becoming a national celebrity. He died at age 26 and was laid to rest here in his native New Mexico. Back to the human world, let's visit Greenlawn Cemetery in Farmington. Here lies Ralph Kiner. He was a professional baseball player in the 40s and 50s, playing outfield for the Pirates, Cubs, and Indians. During that time, he was a 6-time All-Star and a 7-time National League home run leader. After retiring from play, Ralph was a general manager for the Padres and also served as announcer for the New York Mets. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1975 and lived to be 91. Las Cruces is our last New Mexico stop, and Masonic Cemetery. Here we find another figure from Western lore, Sheriff Pat Garrett. He was a lawman known for killing Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was an outlaw linked to several murders. Garrett was a sheriff in New Mexico who pursued Billy the Kid, finally tracking him down and shooting him on July 14, 1881. He would document the events in his book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. Years later, Garrett would be on the other end of the barrel, shot and killed during a dispute in 1908. He was 57. Continuing west, we reach Arizona, and what a view welcomes us to Sedona Community Cemetery, where the typical green grass of cemeteries gives way to beautiful red rock of the southwestern desert. Here we find the grave of James Gregory. You fans of Barney Miller will remember James as Inspector Frank Luger in some 66 episodes of the series. He also had regular roles on shows like Detective School and The Lawless Years. On film, he played General Ursus in Beneath the Planet of the Apes and Senator Iselin in The Manchurian Candidate. He died from natural causes at age 90. Let's head to Prescott to remember some firefighter heroes at Arizona Pioneers Home Cemetery. Resting here all together are a number of the Granite Mountain 19 Hotshots. The Granite Mountain Hotshots were a group within the Prescott Fire Department whose mission it was to fight wildfires. On June 30th, 2013, 19 members of the 20-man group died fighting the Arnell Hill Fire after it overran them. The Arnell Fire was one of the deadliest in U.S. history, and the deadliest for U.S. firefighters since 1933. Several of the firefighters were laid to rest here, others are represented with cenotaphs and buried in their home states. The 2017 film Only the Brave tells their story. Along with our friends in Arizona, we here in LA express our eternal gratitude to these men and the brave men and women everywhere who battle wildfires to keep our communities safe. Thank you. You fans of Western lore will enjoy this next one, particularly her humorous moniker. Follow the signs to the grave of Big Nose Kate. Earlier we visited Doc Holliday. Kate here was his common-law wife. Born in Hungary, she immigrated to the US in 1860. Here she found herself traveling around as a dance hall girl and eventually a prostitute. She met Holliday in 1875 and began a relationship with him. Through their travels together, Kate became a well-known feature of the Old West. She lived to be 90. Kate would be portrayed on screen numerous times in Western films by the likes of Faye Dunaway and Isabella Rossellini. Also in Prescott, we reach another Mountain View cemetery. Earlier we visited Tex Ritter. Now let's meet his wife, Dorothy Faye. She too was an actress, appearing in more than a dozen Western films in the 30s and 40s. 4 of these films were alongside her husband, Tex, including Song of the Buckaroo and Rollin' Westward. She retired from filmmaking in 1941, but made one appearance on TV in 1951. Dorothy was the mother of actor John Ritter. She lived to be 88. This is Holy Hope Cemetery in Tucson. You aficionados of mobster lore might know the name Joseph Bonanno, known as Joey Bananas. He was an Italian crime boss of the Bonanno crime family, which he ran from 1931 to 1968. After heading a crime family for decades, he retired and wrote an autobiography, exposing some of the mob's biggest secrets. His first arrest didn't come until 1980, at the age of 75, for obstruction of justice. Bonanno lived to be 97. We're in Wilcox now, and historic Railroad Park. Here we remember Rex Allen, the Arizona cowboy. He was a singer, songwriter, and actor. In the 40s, singing cowboys were all the rage, and in 1950, Rex followed in their footsteps, starring in more than a dozen Western musical films. Rex wrote and recorded many of the songs released in his films, and would be one of the most popular Western stars of his era. His rich voice was also well suited for narration, and he later found considerable work narrating wildlife films and television shows for Disney. He also narrated The Carousel of Progress and sang the Sherman Brothers song, There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, one of Disney's favorites.
There's a great big beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day.
And for Hanna-Barbera, Rex Allen narrated the 1973 cartoon adaptation of Charlotte's Web. He died at age 78 when, after suffering a heart attack and collapsing in his driveway, he was accidentally run over by the caretaker. His ashes were scattered here at Railroad Park, across the street from his museum here in Arizona. Our next Arizona stop is at the Pioneer and Military Memorial Park in Phoenix. In the southwest corner is the grave of Jacob Waltz. He was a German immigrant known as the Dutchman, said to have discovered the Lost Dutchman gold mine in Arizona in the 1870s. Jacob, the quintessential old prospector, kept the location a secret. His lost gold mine remains one of the most famous lost mines in America. The grave of Jacob Waltz here is the most visited in the Memorial Park, perhaps visitors trying to divine from the man himself the location of his fabled gold mine. Yes, to this day, people still seek out the Dutchman's gold. At Holy Cross in Avondale is one that would have been a nice addition to our Wizard of Oz special. Meet Margaret Pellegrini, an actress, vaudeville performer, and dancer. She's best remembered today for playing Munchkins in the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. Margaret portrayed two characters, a flower pot Munchkin and Sleepyhead Munchkin. She'd be one of the longest surviving Munchkins, making appearances at conventions and on the Walk of Fame when the Munchkins were given their star. Margaret died from a stroke at age 89. This unique gem of funerary history greets us at Greenwood Memorial Park in Phoenix, a century-old horse-drawn hearse. Oh, to add that to my collection. In these grounds, we find Walter Winchell, pioneer of the gossip column. He rose to national celebrity in the 30s with Hearst's newspaper chain and a popular radio program. He uncovered hard news and embarrassing stories on stars, law enforcement, and political leaders through exploitation and blackmail of his wide circle of contacts. Anyone who earned his enmity risked having their reputation damaged in the media, which came to a head during the Red Scare of the 50s. He would also often appear as himself on television, and was the narrator for the TV series The Untouchables. Winchell died at the age of 74. Just one person attended his graveside service, his daughter. In the mausoleum here at Greenwood is the crypt of Dr. Lincoln Ragsdale. During the Second World War, he joined the famed Tuskegee Airmen, a corps of black military pilots. He enlisted to refute the notion at that time that blacks could not fly planes. After the war, he became a prominent civil rights activist here in Arizona, working to enact voting rights, fight discrimination, and desegregate schools, housing, and public accommodations. Ragsdale died from cancer at age 68. High on a hill in Papago Park overlooking Phoenix is this grand pyramid tomb, a monument to Arizona's first governor, George W.P. Hunt. The Old Walrus, as he was known, served 7 terms and helped write Arizona's constitution when it became a state. He supported causes like women's suffrage and pensions for teachers. Hunt had this pyramid built for his wife in 1931 and was entombed herein upon his own death in 1934. An unusual stop, this next one. Not in a cemetery, but a cryogenics facility, the Alcor facility in Scottsdale. Somewhere in this building, frozen in liquid nitrogen, is Ted Williams. He was a professional baseball player, playing his entire 19-year career with the Boston Red Sox, primarily as a left fielder. He's regarded today as one of the greatest hitters in baseball history, the last player to hit over 400 in a season. He was a 19-time All-Star, 2-time MVP, 2-time Triple Crown winner, 4-time home run leader, among many other career accomplishments. Ted was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1966, 6 years after retiring from play. He passed away in 2002 from heart failure at the age of 83. Though his will stated he wanted to be cremated and his ashes scattered, his children chose to have his remains cryogenically frozen instead, on the chance that he could be revived in the future. More panoramas of the American Southwest welcome us to Green Acres Memorial Park in Scottsdale. Resting here is superstar Billy Graham, real name Wayne Coleman. He was a professional wrestler who rose to fame during his time with the WWF, including a tenure as heavyweight champion from 1977 to 78. He'd be a 3-time world champion in major wrestling promotions. He was also a bodybuilder, close friend of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Wrestling fans of the era remember him for his unique interviewing style and charismatic personality. Coleman died of sepsis and organ failure just short of his 80th birthday. He rests just feet from another wrestling champion, Eddie Guerrero. We're at Paradise Memorial Gardens now. Here we find a star of the silent films, Beverly Bain. She was a leading lady in the early days of cinema, often starring alongside one of silent film's leading men and her future husband, Francis X. Bushman. These include 1916's Romeo and Juliet as Juliet, and 1918's Under Suspicion, making them Hollywood's first romantic screen couple. After the couple divorced, her career went into a decline, and she shifted her focus to the Broadway stage and made a few television appearances into the 50s. Beverly lived to be 87. We'll enjoy more of Arizona's natural beauty here at the National Memorial Cemetery of Arizona, where the grounds are landscaped in harmony with the surrounding desert. First up here, we find the grave of Juanita Quigley. She began her acting career as a child, credited early on as Baby Jane. Her debut was as Claudette Colbert's daughter in 1934's Imitation of Life. She also starred alongside Jean Harlow in Riff Raff. Juanita was also briefly involved in the Our Gang series, playing Sally in The New Pupil and Going to Press. Her last major role was in National Velvet alongside Elizabeth Taylor. She retired from acting and briefly became a nun. Juanita lived to be 86. Lee Aker was another child actor, appearing in notable films of the 50s, like Hondo, Destry, and O. Henry's Full House. Television audiences of the 50s remember him as Rusty of B Company in The Adventures of Rin Tin Tin, in some 164 episodes. He'd also make guest appearances on shows like The Magical World of Disney and The Lucy Show. He left Hollywood at age 20, working as a carpenter and ski instructor. He passed away after suffering a stroke at age 77. One more stop here brings us to the grave of Henry Pollock II. He was an actor with a number of memorable roles on television. He played Jerry Silver on the 80s series Webster, the Sheriff of Nottingham on When Things Were Rotten, and Dracula on Monster Squad. He was also a prolific voice actor, voicing characters on The Smurfs, The Dukes, The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, and Batman the Animated Series. Henry would also host and appear on numerous game shows in the 80s. He died from cancer at age 68. We've arrived now in beautiful Utah, where many of the cemeteries share the majestic backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. Let's begin north of Salt Lake in South Ogden at Washington Heights Memorial Park. Here we find the grave of Robert Walker. You Hitchcock fans will remember Walker as Bruno in the 1951 thriller, Strangers on a Train.
Each one has somebody that he'd like to get rid of. So, they swapped murders.
You also saw him in films like Since You Went Away, See Here, Private Hargrove, and Till the Clouds Roll By. Walker struggled with alcoholism and mental illness. On the night of August 28, 1951, he was found in an agitated emotional state. His psychiatrist administered amylbarbital for sedation. He had been drinking before, and the combination of the drug with alcohol caused him to lose consciousness and stop breathing. He died a short time later, at just 32. Down in Utah County is Alpine City Cemetery. In these grounds is a baseball player named Nick Wilhite. He was a pitcher in the MLB, playing for the Dodgers, Senators, Angels, and Mets. He was part of the Dodgers team that won the 1965 World Series. He played for about 5 years, retiring by the age of 26. He would then coach pitching. Nick died from cancer at age 67. Not far from Nick is the grave of Todd Christensen. He too was a professional athlete, a football player. Todd was a tight end who played in the NFL from 1978 to 1988, primarily with the Raiders. Throughout his career, he was a 2-time Super Bowl champ and 2-time NFL receptions leader. After retiring from play, Todd worked as a commentator for the likes of NBC Sports and ESPN, and he even made an appearance on Married with Children. Todd died from complications of a liver transplant at the age of 57. Doubling back north, let's spend a little time in the Salt Lake Valley, where in the cemeteries you can mingle with deer and apparently with wild turkeys as well. Next up in our lovely Deseret is a notable family from the boxing world resting here in South Jordan Cemetery, the Fighting Fulmers. Gene Cyclone Fulmer was perhaps the most famous of the Fighting Fulmers. He won the World Middleweight Championship in boxing on January 2, 1957, when he upset the legendary Sugar Ray Robinson, winning a unanimous 15-round decision. He lost the title to Dick Tiger in 1962. Fulmer retired with 55 wins, 6 losses, and 3 draws. You fans of Alice in Chains will also be curious to know that Fulmer appears on the cover of their Greatest Hits album. Cyclone lived to be 83. This is Mount Olivet Cemetery in Salt Lake City. Here we find an actress named Ina Claire. She began her career in vaudeville and on the Broadway stage, in musicals and plays like The Gold Diggers and Biography, and was also in the Ziegfeld Follies in 1915 and 16. On film, she'd be best remembered for playing Grand Duchess Swanna in Ninotchka alongside Greta Garbo, and Lucy in The Awful Truth. An inductee into the American Theatre Hall of Fame, Ina Claire lived to be 91, passing away from a heart attack in 1985. Last up here in Utah is the granddaddy of cemeteries here, Salt Lake City Cemetery. Meet Edward Woods. He was an actor appearing in a dozen films in the 30s. He's best remembered today for playing Matt Doyle in 1931's Public Enemy alongside James Cagney. Other notable films include Hot Saturday and Dinner at 8. Edward would also have a notable career on Broadway, and after acting worked extensively behind the camera and stage as well. He lived to be 86. Utahns love to ski, with their license plate proclaimed greatest snow on earth. Here we find a man who turned that love into a career, Jack Reddish, known as Red Dog. He was a dominant alpine skier, competing in the Winter Olympics in 1948 and 1952, and rising to national champion here in the States. Later in his career, he worked in film and television. Jack was a production manager or assistant director on a number of films, like The Great Escape, Bullet, and Bonnie and Clyde. He lived to be 65. Here in Salt Lake, we also find a notable painter named Arnold Freeberg. He's remembered particularly for his historical, patriotic, and religious paintings. Among his best-known works is a depiction of George Washington called The Prayer at Valley Forge. Freeberg also did concept paintings for the Cecil B. DeMille film The Ten Commandments in the early 50s. His work on the film earned him an Academy Award nomination. Arnold Freeberg lived to be 96. Last up here is the grave of a notable figure from both Mormon and Old West folklore, Porter Rockwell. He was known as the Destroying Angel and the modern-day Samson. The latter moniker given him by the prophet Joseph Smith. Rockwell was his bodyguard. Joseph told him that so long as he didn't cut his hair, no bullet or blade could harm him, echoing the biblical Samson. Rockwell was also the bodyguard of Smith's successor, Brigham Young, traveling west with the pioneers. He would become a notorious figure in the American West, a deputy marshal, religious enforcer, gunslinger, and brewer. His legacy is a controversial one, though, a saint and a sinner, given the number of people he killed throughout his life. He was once quoted as saying, "I never killed anyone that didn't need killing," a quote paraphrased by John Wayne in True Grit. A year before his death, Rockwell was indicted for alleged participation in the murders of the Aiken Party, but he would die before his trial at the age of 64 from heart failure. He's been portrayed on film numerous times, including by John Carradine. Hello, Idaho. We've got just one stop here in the Gem State, one for you lovers of literature. This is Ketchum Cemetery. Look for a grave adorned with libaceous offerings. It's the grave of Ernest Hemingway. He was an author who received the 1954 Nobel Prize in Literature. His works have become classics in American literature. Among his best known are the novels The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and A Farewell to Arms. The Old Man and the Sea would also earn him the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. His works would be adapted on screen, including the Bogart-Bacall vehicle To Have and Have Not, and The Old Man and the Sea, starring Spencer Tracy. Much of Hemingway's later life was spent in ill health and deep in the bottle. He took his own life at the age of 61. We've reached the Pacific Northwest. One of Washington State's major cities is Seattle. But do you know how Seattle got its name? Let's head to Suquamish Memorial Cemetery to find out. This is the grave of Chief Seattle, the Suquamish and Duwamish chief. A leader among his people, Chief Seattle worked to mediate between Native Americans and white settlers. He strived to live amicably and peaceably with the newcomers, even helping them survive. In 1854, he famously gave a speech in which he made a plea to white settlers for respect of Native American rights and environmental values. Founders of the city of Seattle would name their city after the beloved chief, who passed away in 1866. Next up is Kalama Cemetery, an Oddfellows cemetery. In these grounds are a couple members of the Brando family. Here lies Christian Brando. He was the son of Marlon Brando. Like his father, Christian dabbled in acting, never quite gaining the fame of his father. He appeared in 6 films in the 60s to the 90s, including The Secret Life of an American Wife and Unmasked Part 25. But today, Christian is remembered for his tumultuous personal and family life and the killing of his sister's boyfriend. In 1990, Brando fatally shot Dag Drawlett, who was in a relationship with his half-sister Cheyenne. He pled guilty to manslaughter in the highly publicized trial and was sentenced to prison. He was released after 5 years. Brando died from pneumonia at just 49. He rests here alongside his mother, Anna Cashfee. Anna was Marlon Brando's first wife, an actress herself. She appeared in 8 film and TV productions in the 50s and 60s, including Battle Hymn and Night of the Quarter Moon. But like her son, Anna's tumultuous personal life would forever overshadow her contributions to the entertainment world. She married Marlon Brando in 1957, a marriage that would produce 1 son and last just a year and a half. A bitter custody battle would follow, for years, over their son. After Marlon won custody, Anna allegedly paid $10,000 to have Christian kidnapped. She wrote a memoir titled Brando for Breakfast. Anna died at age 80. Miller Woodlawn Memorial Park is in Bremerton. Here we find the crypt of Andrew Wood. He was a musician, a pioneer of grunge and alternative rock. Andrew was lead singer in the bands Malfunction and then Mother Love Bone. The band quickly grew a loyal following and worked on recording their debut album, Apple, which was released in 1990. But just before the album's release, Andrew overdosed on heroin. He was found comatose and placed on life support, dying 3 days later. Andrew was 24. The devastated band broke up after Andrew's death. The musicians would spin off into Temple of the Dog and the legendary rock band Pearl Jam. We're back at Lakeview Cemetery, where in previous videos we visited Bruce and Brandon Lee. Down the hill from the Lees is the grave of John Saxon. The actor can be seen in close to 200 film and television productions. He's known particularly for his work in westerns and horror films, often playing police officers. You saw him as Lieutenant Thompson in A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Lieutenant Fuller in Black Christmas. Other films include Portrait in Black, The Appaloosa, and Enter the Dragon, alongside his neighbor here, Bruce Lee. Saxon died from pneumonia at age 83. Let's make our way now to Sunset Lane Memorial Park in Port Orchard. Here lies Ron Wayne Davies. He was a songwriter who rose to prominence in the 70s. He released a number of his own albums, but his greatest claims to fame are songs he wrote, covered by other artists. He wrote It Ain't Easy, performed by Three Dog Night and David Bowie, Long Hard Climb, performed by Helen Reddy, and many, many more. Davies died at age 57. Home of Peace Cemetery is in Lakewood. This is the grave of Yaphet Kotto. The actor starred in a number of notable films in the 70s and 80s. He played Parker in Alien, Alonzo in Midnight Run, and he was the main villain, Kananga, in the James Bond film Live and Let Die.
Why, my dear Mr. Bond, it'll positively drive them out of their minds and subsequently out of the business.
Quite ingenious. A sort of junkie's welfare system.
Well, merely until the number of addicts in the country has doubled, shall we say.
On television, he'd be nominated for an Emmy for his role in Raid on Entebbe, and played Lieutenant Jardello in 122 episodes of Homicide, Life on the Street. Yaphet lived to be 81. This charming churchyard surrounds the San Juan Presbyterian Church in Friday Harbor. There's a hidden Mickey in this churchyard. Spot it and you'll be at the grave of Larry Clemens. Larry began working at Disney as an animator in the 30s on shorts like Tortoise and the Hare and Tugboat Mickey. He would soon establish himself as one of Disney's most trusted writers, writing and co-writing screenplays for beloved animated classics like The Jungle Book, The Aristocats, Robin Hood, The Rescuers, and several of the Winnie the Pooh films. Larry also wrote for Bing Crosby's radio program. He lived to be 81. You probably also noticed the MGM under his wife's name here. Carlita Orr was a model and briefly an actress under contract at MGM, appearing in small roles in The Great Ziegfeld and Sing Baby Sing. Carletta also lived to be 81. Inching our way back home, our journey takes us now to Oregon. This is Eagle Point National Cemetery, another veterans cemetery. Here lies Charlene Shorty Pryor. She was a professional baseball player in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, playing mainly second base and center field in the 40s and 50s. Charlene ranked among the fastest runners in the league, topping the circuit in stolen bases for multiple years, and led outfielders in fielding percentage. She'd also be a part of 2 championship teams in the 50s and the All-Star team in 1951. Charlene died at age 77. We're now in the mausoleum at Scenic Hills Memorial Park in Ashland. Here is the niche of Erskine Caldwell. He was an author known for his writings on poverty, racism, and social problems in his native South. His 1932 novel Tobacco Road and his 1933 novel God's Little Acre won him critical acclaim and would become American bestsellers. Tobacco Road would be adapted into a play in 1933, which for a time held the Broadway record for most consecutive performances. Both novels would also be adapted on film. Caldwell died from complications of emphysema and lung cancer at age 83. Moving into Jacksonville, this is Jacksonville Cemetery. In these grounds rests Catherine Colson. You fans of Twin Peaks will remember Catherine, and her tombstone here gives a nod to her role. Catherine played the Log Lady in David Lynch's landmark TV series Twin Peaks. She also worked with Lynch on other projects like Eraserhead behind the camera. You also saw Catherine on shows like Psych and in films like Femme Fatale. Her final on-screen appearance was a reprisal of her Log Lady role in the 2017 sequel of Twin Peaks. She died from complications of cancer at age 71. And look, someone even left a log here on her grave. This is Hillcrest Memorial Park in Grants Pass, eternal home to Steve Rains. Steve was a familiar face to fans of Western television in the 50s and 60s. He played Jim Quince in over 200 episodes of Rawhide. He also appeared on Maverick, Laredo, The Roy Rogers Show, and Gunsmoke. And his film roles include 1951's Border Fence. Steve passed away after suffering a stroke at age 79. Nearby is the grave of Elaine DeVry. The actress appeared in over 40 film and television productions in the 50s to the 90s. She played Audrey in The Atomic Kid, Jean in Diary of a Madman, and Alice in China Doll. Elaine also made appearances on television shows like I Dream of Jeannie and Perry Mason. She lived her final years on a ranch in Oregon, passing away at the age of 93. Elaine rests next to her husband Will J. White, a prolific television actor. He appeared in more than 100 productions throughout his career. On film, he played Lieutenant Reed in the 1957 film The Lawless 80s, but his television credits far outnumber his film roles. He played Constable MacDonald on Lassie and in Lassie's Great Adventure, and made guest appearances on many shows of the era like Gunsmoke, One Step Beyond, Tales of Wells Fargo, M Squad, and Bonanza. Will retired from the screen in 1979 and lived to be 66. In the quiet rural Hopewell Cemetery southwest of Portland rests a founding father of rock and roll. Here lies Johnny Ray. Johnny rose to popularity in the 50s, a singer who was something of a transition from the crooners into rock and roll. His debut album was released in 1952, featuring 2 hit singles, Cry and The Little White Cloud That Cried.
You feel better if you cry.
2 years later, he played Steve in the film There's No Business Like Show Business. His career began to wane in the 60s, but remained strong in the UK and Australia. Johnny Ray would influence legends to follow, from Elvis to Bob Dylan. Johnny died from liver failure in Los Angeles at age 63. He was subsequently laid to rest here with his family. Moving up to Portland, we reach Ahavai Shalom Cemetery. Here lies a tragic young figure from Hollywood, Rebecca Schaeffer. She began her career as a model before moving into acting. In 1986, she landed the role for which she is best known, playing Patty Russell in the CBS comedy My Sister Sam. And her film roles include Radio Days and scenes from the class struggle in Beverly Hills. But her life and promising career were cut tragically short in 1989 when she was shot and killed by an obsessed fan who had been stalking her. Rebecca was 21. Her killer had found her address through the DMV, killing her on her doorstep as she prepared to audition for a role in The Godfather Part 3. As a result of the incident, federal law regarding the release of personal information through the DMV was changed. Schaeffer's death helped prompt the passing of America's first anti-stalking laws. We're in Eugene, Oregon now, and Rest Haven Memorial Park. Let's remember the Hadley family here, prominent ice skaters in the 1960s. Earlier we visited Steffi Westerfeld. With her on that ill-fated flight were brother and sister figure skating pair Isla Ray Hadley and Ray Hadley Jr. The duo had won the bronze medal in pairs at the 1960 U.S. Figure Skating Championship. They also competed in the Winter Olympics and World Figure Skating Championships that year. The following year, in February 1961, they were aboard the plane to Prague that crashed in Belgium and killed the entire U.S. figure skating team. Isla was 18, Ray 17. Our last Oregon stop will likely conjure up sweet memories of childhood for many of you. This is Pike Cemetery in Yamhill. Here lies Beverly Cleary. The author of children's and young adult fiction was one of America's most successful authors. Some of her best-known characters include Ramona and Beezus Quimby, Henry Huggins, and Ralph S. Mouse. For her work, she'd win the National Book Award, Newbery Medal, and National Medal of Arts. Her Ramona and Beezus would be adapted on screen in 2010, played by Joey King and Selena Gomez. Beverly Cleary lived an astonishing 104 years. Look for her characters in statue form in parks here in Oregon. Hello to our neighbors in Nevada. Let's kick off our time here at Bunker's Edenvale Memorial Park in Las Vegas. Into the Chapel of Eternal Peace and the Remembrance section, we find the crypt of Harry James. He was one of the big band era's most famous band leaders. A trumpet player, he led a popular band in the 30s and 40s and was well known for his technical proficiency and tone on the trumpet. They recorded hits like You Make Me Love You and I'm Beginning to See the Light. He also appeared and played in film, often as himself or an analog of himself, including Springtime in the Rockies and How to Marry a Millionaire, both of which featured his wife, actress Betty Grable. He died from lymphatic cancer at age 67. Frank Sinatra delivered the eulogy. Out to the grounds here at Bunkers, we find the grave of Liz Renee, an actress, author, and stripper. She gained a cult following for her starring role in the 1977 John Waters film Desperate Living. She toured the country in a striptease act with her daughter, and at one time dated mobster Mickey Cohen. Liz was convicted of perjury in 1959 and served 27 months in prison. She'd go on to write a number of tell-all books, including My Face for the World to See. Liz's other film appearances include Blackenstein and The Nasty Rabbit. She lived to be 80. There are several palm cemeteries across the Las Vegas area. This one is downtown. Let's meet Ole Olson and Chick Johnson. They were a popular music and comedy act on vaudeville, radio, Broadway, movies, and even television. They began performing together in the 19-teens and found their biggest success in their theater production of Hell's a Poppin'. It ran for more than 1,400 performances. It would be adapted on screen in 1941. Other memorable films the duo made include 1944's Ghost Catchers. Olson's famous quote, "May you live as long as you want to, and may you laugh as long as you live," is inscribed here on a marker between the two. They traveled the world entertaining together throughout their lives, and now rest side by side in eternity. This is Palm Boulder Highway Cemetery in Henderson. Here lies Maceo Anderson. He was a noted dancer, tap dance to be specific, the last original member of the groundbreaking tap dance group Four Step Brothers. The group began performing together in the 20s under Anderson's leadership. They broke the color line when they became the first black act to perform at Radio City Music Hall and the first to perform on television. The Four Step Brothers became the best-known dance act in the nation and would take their talents to films like When Johnny Comes Marching Home. Anderson lived to be 90. Continuing the Palm theme, this Palm Cemetery is Palm Northwest in Las Vegas. First up here is Rudy Malgary. He was a singer, part of the doo-wop quartet known as the Crew Cuts. They're most famous for their hit record, Shaboom.
Life could be a dream, sweetheart. Hello, hello again. Shaboom, and hoping we'll meet again.
The group would tour the world and would appear on variety shows, including The Ed Sullivan Show. Rudy lived to be 73. Another musician can be found in the Garden Mausoleum, Pete Moore. You fans of the Motown group The Miracles will know Pete as bass singer with the group from 1955 onward. He also co-wrote and arranged many of their hits, including The Tracks of My Tears. Other of their hits include You Really Got a Hold on Me, The Tears of a Clown, and Love Machine.
You really got a hold on me. Really got a hold on me. Really.
Pete would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with The Miracles. He died from complications of diabetes at age 79. Our last Nevada stop was an icon of reality television here in Las Vegas. You fans of Pawn Stars will remember the unique character, Old Man Harrison. He was co-owner with his son Rick of the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop here in Las Vegas. The shop became the setting of the History Channel's immensely popular reality show, Pawn Stars, which debuted in 2009. He described his role on the show as being an old grump. He was also known as the appraiser, as others in the shop would often seek him out for his wisdom and experience. Richard Old Man Harrison passed away from complications of Parkinson's disease at the age of 77. Before landing back home in California, we have one more state to visit on our tour today. So let's hop a plane over the Pacific and enjoy a little time in paradise. Aloha, Hawaii. Outside the Garden of Hope Mausoleum at Diamond Head Memorial Park in Honolulu is the grave of High Chief Peter Maivia and his wife, Leah. Peter was one of the first Polynesian wrestlers to grace the professional wrestling stage and the first to come out of Samoa. He began wrestling in the 60s around Australia, then Hawaii, and joined the WWF in the 70s, becoming one of its biggest stars. He'd then move into the NWA, winning a number of titles including the NWA America's Heavyweight Championship. He also had a role in the James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice. Maivia would be inducted into the Professional Wrestling and WWE Halls of Fame. His wife Leah was a professional wrestling promoter. They are the grandparents of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The Rock would induct Leah into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2024. Also in Honolulu is the Kauai-Ahau Churchyard. Somewhere in these grounds is buried David Douglas. David was a scientist, a botanist to be precise, someone who studies plants. He is the namesake of the Douglas fir, for having first reported the extraordinary nature and potential of the species. Douglas undertook a number of successful botanical expeditions, mainly to the Pacific Northwest and here in Hawaii. He died under mysterious circumstances in 1834 while climbing Mauna Kea here at the age of 35. He apparently fell into a pit trap where he was mauled by a bull. His body was buried in a location here in the churchyard, which is now lost to history. There's a marker here for a mass grave. Perhaps he's there. Also here we find the mausoleum of King Lunalilo. William Charles Lunalilo was the 6th monarch of the Kingdom of Hawaii from his election in 1873 until his death a year later. He was a grandnephew of King Kamehameha I. Lunalilo was beloved as the first elected monarch, known as the People's King. He was just 39 when he died from tuberculosis. What better way to wrap up our tour today than with a view like this from Hawaii? This is Manoa Chinese Cemetery in Honolulu. Here we find a man named Chang Apana. He was a Chinese-Hawaiian member of the Honolulu Police Department, as an officer then detective. Due to his proficiency in several languages, his network of informants, and shrewd detective style, Chang was successful in solving many cases. Author Earl Dare Biggers was vacationing in Hawaii in 1920, where he was inspired to write the novel House Without a Key. He read Honolulu newspapers which shared the exploits of Chang Apana. Inspired by him, Biggers created a character for his novel, Charlie Chan. The character became immensely popular, spawning a series of books and dozens of films. Charlie Chan was one of the first examples of an Asian protagonist in American media, portrayed as warm and wise, standing in contrast to the typical unflattering or villainous portrayals of Asians of that era. It's said that Chang Apana enjoyed watching his fictional counterpart on screen. Chang died in 1933 after a long illness at the age of 61. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.